It began with 6 words that shattered a father's heart more deeply than any betrayal ever could. Standing outside a beautifully decorated wedding venue with a small gift wrapped in blue paper and tears already filling his eyes, he watched his own daughter look at him with a cold expression before turning away. Every dream he had carried for decades collapsed in a single moment when she made it painfully clear that he did not belong there. The guests stared in silence, whispers spread through the crowd, and the man who had sacrificed everything for his child suddenly looked like an unwanted stranger. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He simply stepped back, reached into his pocket, and made one quiet phone call that would change the entire wedding forever. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, and second chances, please take a moment to like this video, comment where you're watching from, share it with someone who believes family matters, and subscribe to Moments Hub. Your support helps us bring more emotional stories that touch the heart. David Harper had never imagined that the happiest day of his daughter's life would become the loneliest day of his own. 26 years earlier, he had stood in a hospital room holding tiny Emily in his trembling hands after losing his wife during childbirth. That day he silently promised his newborn daughter that she would never feel alone, no matter how difficult life became. Keeping that promise cost him almost everything. He worked double shifts as a mechanic, skipped meals so Emily could attend better schools, repaired old clothes instead of buying new ones for himself, and quietly ignored his own dreams because every extra dollar went toward giving his daughter opportunities he never had. While other fathers enjoyed weekends resting, David spent his Saturdays fixing neighbors' cars for extra income and his Sundays helping Emily prepare school projects. Every achievement she celebrated became his greatest reward. As Emily grew older, the distance between them slowly widened without David realizing how serious it had become. She earned scholarships, graduated from a prestigious university, and eventually entered a world filled with successful executives, luxury lifestyles, and influential people. David remained the same humble mechanic with grease permanently stained into his hands and wrinkles earned through years of honest labor. He was proud that his daughter had escaped the hardships he had endured, but somewhere along the journey, Emily became embarrassed by the life she had left behind. She stopped inviting him to corporate events, introduced him as a family friend instead of her father, and slowly reduced their conversations to short holiday phone calls. When Emily announced her engagement to Ryan Collins, the son of a wealthy real estate developer, David genuinely believed this would be their chance to reconnect. He congratulated her with tears of happiness and quietly began saving money for the wedding gift. Every week he placed a small amount into an old coffee tin hidden inside his workshop. While others assumed he was simply working overtime, David was secretly building the only gift he thought worthy of his daughter's special day. Months passed, and no invitation arrived. He convinced himself that weddings required complicated planning and patiently waited. Only 3 days before the ceremony did he discover the truth through social media. Beautiful engagement photos filled the internet while friends congratulated Emily for her upcoming wedding. David's hands shook as he stared at the screen. Still believing there had been a mistake, he bought a modest suit, wrapped the carefully chosen gift, and drove 2 hours to the elegant countryside venue on the wedding morning. The decorations looked like something from a fairy tale. White roses covered every entrance, crystal chandeliers sparkled beneath enormous tents, and expensive cars lined the parking area. David walked slowly toward the entrance, smiling despite the nervousness in his heart. Then he saw Emily. She looked breathtaking in her wedding dress, surrounded by bridesmaids and photographers. For a brief second, he remembered the little girl who used to run into his arms after school. But the warmth vanished instantly. Emily's face hardened as she noticed him standing nearby. The pain that followed became unforgettable. She made it unmistakably clear that he had not been invited and that he should leave because his presence would embarrass everyone. Conversations stopped. Cameras lowered. Guests looked away awkwardly. David felt every eye watching the father who apparently wasn't welcome at his own daughter's wedding. He didn't defend himself. He didn't remind anyone of sleepless nights, unpaid bills, or birthdays he spent working overtime so Emily could have a better future. He simply nodded with quiet dignity. Then, before walking away, he reached into his pocket, unlocked his old phone, and made one brief call. Within 20 minutes, several luxury vehicles entered the estate. Guests turned their attention toward the unexpected arrivals. Out stepped elegant men and women wearing tailored suits, accompanied by security personnel. They weren't celebrities or politicians. They were executives from one of the country's largest charitable foundations, an organization known for transforming struggling communities through education and healthcare projects. They weren't attending because of the bride or groom. They had come because of David Harper. Years earlier, after repairing a stranded traveler's vehicle without accepting payment, David had unknowingly helped the retired founder of the foundation. Instead of taking the offered reward, David requested that the money be donated to children who needed school supplies. Deeply moved by his character, the founder invited David to quietly serve as a volunteer advisor for several community projects. Over the years, David never accepted recognition, publicity, or financial rewards. He simply continued helping families, mentoring young mechanics, funding scholarships anonymously whenever possible, and donating portions of his modest income. Unknown to almost everyone, countless lives had changed because of his quiet generosity. The foundation's current president stepped forward and apologized publicly for arriving unexpectedly. He explained that David had reluctantly called only to cancel his attendance at that evening's charity gala because of a personal family matter. After hearing what had happened, the board unanimously decided to come personally. In front of hundreds of stunned guests, they announced that David Harper would receive the foundation's Lifetime Humanitarian Award later that evening for decades of anonymous service that had inspired thousands of people. They described scholarship programs bearing his hidden donations, homeless shelters he helped repair with his own hands, and families whose futures existed because one humble mechanic refused to ignore people in need. Silence filled the wedding venue. Ryan's wealthy parents, who had judged David by his appearance, lowered their heads in embarrassment. Guests who had dismissed him moments earlier suddenly realized they were standing before a man whose wealth could never be measured by bank accounts or expensive clothing. Emily remained frozen. Every sacrifice she had forgotten returned to her memory at once. She remembered the winter nights when her father wore an old jacket so she could have a new coat. She remembered the birthday bicycle he somehow afforded despite skipping his own medical treatment. She remembered every bedtime story told by exhausted eyes that never complained. The realization struck harder than any public humiliation ever could. She hadn't rejected a poor mechanic. She had rejected the greatest example of love she would ever know. Tears destroyed the flawless makeup that had taken hours to prepare. She walked across the lawn, no longer caring about photographers, expensive guests, or perfect appearances. Pride disappeared, replaced by overwhelming regret. She embraced the father she had pushed away and cried harder than she had in years. David didn't remind her of her mistake. He simply held his daughter the same way he had comforted her after childhood nightmares, proving that real parents continue loving even after their hearts are broken. The ceremony paused for nearly an hour, not because of scandal, but because everyone present witnessed something far more powerful than a wedding. They witnessed forgiveness. They witnessed humility. They witnessed the priceless value of unconditional love. David eventually walked his daughter down the aisle, not because tradition demanded it, but because love deserved one more chance. If this story has touched your heart so far, please pause for a moment and leave a like. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, subscribe to Moments Hub, and tell us your thoughts in the comments. Stories like these remind us that love and forgiveness still exist in this world. Before the ending, tell us in the comments, if you were David, would you have forgiven your daughter so quickly? We'd truly love to read your answer. Years later, Emily often told her own children that success means nothing if it costs you the people who loved you before anyone else believed in you. David never mentioned the painful wedding day again. Instead, he spent his remaining years surrounded by a family that finally understood his true value. The expensive decorations, luxury cars, and glamorous celebration eventually faded into memory, but one quiet phone call became the moment that reminded everyone present that character always outlives appearance, sacrifice always outshines status, and a parent's love remains the strongest force a heart can ever know. The greatest victory that day was never about proving anyone wrong. It was about proving that kindness, humility, and forgiveness can rebuild even the most broken family when someone chooses love over pride.